Everyone, we are again waiting for Ben Shapiro to start speaking there on the Berkeley campus. And while we wait, I figure I'll give you some Ben Shapiro facts for those of you who don't know that much about him. So Ben Shapiro is a native of Los Angeles. He's only 33 years old, and he's an American conservative political commentator, columnist, author, and of course a lawyer. He graduated from UCLA and then attended Harvard Law School and graduated in 2007. He actually skipped 2 grades, interestingly enough, before graduating from high school at the age of 16. He currently runs an independent legal consultation firm in Los Angeles. He has written several books, and his family is Jewish, partially from Russia. Now, for those of you wondering which grades he skipped, well, he skipped 2 grades. It was 3rd grade and 9th grade. So those are just some Ben Shapiro facts for you. He obviously also has ties to Breitbart and the Daily Wire. Some more information as far as his writing career is concerned. While he was a student at UCLA, Ben Shapiro became the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the United States at the age of 17. Interestingly enough, he had to require his parents to sign the contract for him to do that. By the age of 21, he had written 2 books. And in 2012, he became editor-at-large of Breitbart News. He then resigned from his position at Breitbart last year, March 2016. He also founded the Daily Wire in September of 2015. He is the editor-in-chief as well as the host of his political online podcast, The Ben Shapiro Show.
Good evening. Dear guests, let me begin by saying I am the Vice Chancellor of Finance here at Berkeley, and we welcome you. At UC Berkeley, we respect and value the action and intention of public protest as intrinsic to the values of an environment of learning and higher education. Tonight's speech and discussion was brought to us by the students of UC Berkeley for the engagement and advancement of larger student body of UC Berkeley. To those of you who engaged in your right to protest, we ask that you respect these fellow students and the rest of the audience by allowing this event to continue, just as we respect your right to be heard as you have been. UCPD and the campus will be making the decisions about how disruptions at this event will be addressed. Subsequent speakers may make statements about how the campus will handle disruptions. Those statements have not been approved by the campus and may not be accurate. Enjoy your evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bradley Devlin, Secretary of the Berkeley College Republicans. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Ben Shapiro at Berkeley. Say no to campus thuggery. Yes, Ben Shapiro may be accustomed to the thug life on YouTube, but he has some choice words for violent leftist organizations which violate the covenant of civil society and tear down political discourse in the United States of America. But first, a word from our sponsors. Young America's Foundation, without their help, this event would not be happening. They make it possible for students across the country to hear conservative ideas not taught at institutions of higher education. We also want to thank Fred Allen, the generous sponsor of Young America's Foundation's Fred Allen Lecture Series. We are grateful for his commitment to free speech. But first, I have to do some housekeeping. I have to read our own facility statement because of the great relationship this university has with its conservative students. Ladies and gentlemen, the Berkeley College Republicans and Young America's Foundation are committed to ensuring the freedom of expression and dialogue that elicits the full spectrum of views from varied communities on the UC Berkeley campus. For the duration of our event, we call for civility and respect. Civility entails respecting one another in our personal and public interactions and maintaining respect for viewpoints that differ from our own. Freedom of speech is a cornerstone of our republic and integral to institutions of higher education because it ensures the accumulation of knowledge and can challenge and establish principles. Consider this a warning to those of you engaged in protests and the audience at large. We ask you to respect the students of the University of California, Berkeley, and the rest of the audience. You have been heard inside and outside of this venue. If anyone initiates or participates in disruption or violence of any kind, they will be escorted out by the University Police Department. On behalf of the Berkeley College Republicans, Young America's Foundation, and Mr. Shapiro, we thank you in advance for your cooperation and adherence to these guidelines. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, syndicated columnist, New York Times best-selling author, and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. Ben received his degree at UCLA as a political science major at the age of 20. He then went on to earn his Harvard Law degree. At the young age of 33, Ben has become an icon for a new generation of constitutional conservatives. Usually you can catch Ben on Fox and CNN and on the biggest conservative podcasts in the nation. But tonight, against the wishes of the University of California and to the dismay of the People's Republic of Berkeley, you get to see him live. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ben Shapiro.
Thank you so much. I only wish the administration had allowed us to fill up the rest of these seats, which we certainly would have.
We love you!
Well, love you right back. So, first of all, I just want to thank Berkeley, which I have to say, conservatives here have done something amazing. They've just achieved something incredible. If you look outside, there's K-Bar everywhere. They've built basically these structures to keep Antifa from invading the premises. So that means that Berkeley has actually achieved building a wall before Donald Trump did. Thank you all for being here, because obviously braving the idiots outside is not always easy. Their speech is apparently violence, because my speech is violence, so all speech is violence. So thank you for braving the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune by walking into a building. Congratulations to you. Thanks to Fred Allen, thanks to Young America's Foundation, and the Berkeley College Republicans for their courage. Thanks to the police. Thank you to the police, who have done an amazing job. These are the folks who stand between civilization and lawlessness. I saw the videos of business owners having to shutter up their windows today early. Bank of America blocking off its ATMs because they were afraid that Antifa was going to break them. The only people who are standing between those ATMs and Antifa are the police. And all they get from the left is a bunch of crap. That's all they get from the left. But these are the heroes who stand between us and darkness. So thank them. Thank you to the morons who put up that sign across the way. It says, "We say no to your white supremacist bullshit." Well, I say thank you because I also say no to white supremacist bullshit. And if you stick around long enough in this speech, you'll hear me do exactly that. The problem is I also say no to your identity politics bullshit. Thanks to Antifa and the supposed anti-fascist brigade for exposing what the radical left truly is. All of America is watching because you guys are so stupid. It's horrifying, I am grateful, and you can all go to hell, you pathetic, lying, stupid jackasses. The same goes for the mayor of the city, who has suggested that Antifa occasionally be given free reign over the city and that conservatives should go home because we wouldn't want to provoke violence. I do want to actually thank the administration for making the effort to put on this event tonight. There were a lot of obstacles, and I'll talk about the obstacles in a little bit, but they did attempt to make the effort, and they did unshackle the police to actually protect this. So thank you to the administration for doing that. I saw a lot of headlines on the way here about how it's going to cost $600,000 in security for this event. And that is not due to me. I mean, I'm not the one out threatening to break windows. It's not due to you. You're here listening. It's due to the Antifa hard-left morons who are out there breaking windows. And I do want to say one thing, which is that in a city as left as Berkeley, if you're going to blame me for the $600,000 in spending on security, you're all Keynesians. Think of all the jobs I just created. Now, this lecture is titled Say No to Campus Thuggery. That's the title of the lecture because of Antifa and the wave of violence that has engulfed this campus since earlier this year. I spoke here last year. Some of you may remember. I was here last year. Okay, I spoke in like February 2016 here. Nothing, right? I mean, it was a packed house. I had 2 security guards. That was it. No violence, no nothing. And now we are spending well into 6 figures so that I can say many of the same things. Okay. It's utterly absurd. It's utterly absurd. But things have changed. Well, why have they changed? It's because there's a pathetic new movement arising all over the country, from Sacramento to Berkeley to Dallas to Charlottesville, and that movement says that speech is violence and must be treated as such. This is groups like Refuse Fascism. Don't worry, I'll get to the alt-right later. This is groups like Refuse Fascism, which professes to promote protest, but has actually said it won't rule out working with groups like Antifa. Here is the poster that they put out earlier about me. I don't know who designs their posters, but guys, this is too many words. bad logo, and bad imagery, just poorly done. They say on this, the problem is not campus thuggery. For those of you who can't say this, no, Ben Shapiro, the problem is not campus thuggery. The problem is fascist intellectual thuggery in the service of the Trump-Pence fascist regime. Well, to believe this, you have to have your head so far up your ass you can actually see your colon firsthand. Let's define a few terms. First of all, fascist intellectual thuggery. Let's start with fascism. What exactly is fascism? Well, this is a term that gets thrown around a lot by people who have never read a book. Okay, fascism is the phenomenon whereby people believe that they have the capacity to ram their beliefs down your throat at the point of a gun, or say the point of a baton, or by throwing Molotov cocktails. That's what fascism truly is. Fascism is even more of a tactic than it is an ideology. It's sort of vague in terms of ideology. You've had people on the left who are fascist, people like Stalin, and then you've had people who are on the European right, like Hitler, who's fascist, who's actually closer to the traditional American left than he would be to the traditional American right. But I've been spending my entire career standing up against fascism and the idea of an overreaching government that uses the power of the gun in order to compel people to do what they want. Antifa is fascist. I am not a fascist. And as far as the service to the Trump-Pence fascist regime, first of all, I just want to note something. For all the talk about Trump and Pence being fascist, like look at the protests outside. Where's Orange Hitler shutting it down? Right? He's nowhere to be found. This idea that we're living in a fascist country, we're actually living under a relatively ineffectual regime, a relatively ineffectual administration, if anything. But the idea that we're living in some sort of fascist dystopia is utterly absurd. As far as the idea that, I'm a white supremacist in service to Trump-Pence, a couple problems there. One, as far as the service of Trump-Pence, again, I didn't vote for Trump or Hillary. I didn't vote for either of them, actually. So this idea that I am somehow a servant of Trump is absurd and requires you to be functionally illiterate. As far as the idea I'm a white supremacist, you see the thing on the top of my head, right? This funny hat. Called a yarmulke. Okay, white supremacists aren't that fond of it, which is why I was, according to the Anti-Defamation League, the #1 recipient of white supremacist anti-Semitism on the internet among journalists in 2016. But no, I'm a white supremacist now. Because this is the way the left works, right? If you don't agree with them, everyone's a white supremacist. You're a Nazi, Nazis should be punched, and therefore it's totally fine to stand outside and try to shut down events if you can get away with it. They're not getting away with it tonight because the police have been allowed to actually do their job. So what is their specific objection to me? Well, according to this masterfully done poster, it says, Shapiro is coming to campus to spread ugly fascist views, dressed up in slick-talking intellectual garb. I do like the slick-talking. It says, this is harmful, exclamation point. He, along with fascists of many stripes, have targeted Berkeley because reversing Berkeley's radical history would be a major advance for the consolidation of fascism on campuses everywhere and throughout society. The reason I'm here, I've been asked this a lot, the reason that I am here is because fascism does not own this university. Because there are students who do want to hear differing views, who don't want to be told that they can only hear one view, who don't believe that the First Amendment should die under the jackboots and Birkenstocks of a bunch of anarchist, communist pieces of garbage. But I don't just want to talk about the people who actually get violent, because I think that in a civil society, this is one thing we should all agree on, and I've been pleased to see that even people like Nancy Pelosi have condemned Antifa. Nancy Pelosi, with whom I disagree on literally every issue it is possible to disagree on, including the proper use of Botox. But she and I agree on this. Right? We all agree that violence should be out of bounds, and if you're on the left and you don't agree with that, let me suggest to you that you don't belong living in a civilized society. Because civilized society is based on the premise that the government has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, as Max Weber put it, and the idea that you're supposed to violate that if you don't like what I'm saying makes you an uncivilized barbarian. Okay, but it's not just that I want to talk about. Okay, I want to talk about an ideology that goes a little bit deeper than that. Antifa couldn't go anywhere without an ideology that runs broader than Antifa, without a group of people willing to look the other way. Well, what is the view that undergirds Antifa? What's the view that undergirds the hard left, many of whom celebrate Antifa or were doing so until it became politically unpalatable to do so? It's a view that America is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad place. Right, now, the truth is that America is an incredible place. It's the greatest place in the history of the world. It is the freest, most prosperous country, the most tolerant country in the history of planet Earth. this country is an incredible place full of opportunity. Nobody, by and large, cares enough about you to stop you from achieving your dreams. That includes you, people who are shouting out there in the audience. Okay, no one cares about you. Get over yourselves. I don't care about you. No one cares about you. No one's trying to stop you because you're irrelevant to me. I have a wife and 2 children. I care about them. I don't care about you. You don't mean anything to me. Well, except for that guy who said he loves me. I love that guy too. But everybody else, okay? That means in a free country, if you fail, it is probably your own fault. If it is somebody else's fault, if somebody is actually trying to throw up obstacles in front of you in a way that is unjust and bigoted, point out the specific instance so we can all side with you. We all want to be on the same side. We all want to help out. When somebody is a racist and trying to stop you, we all want to sound off and stop that too. The idea, however, that America as a whole owns your failure when you can't point to specific problems does not wash. It is you shifting the buck. It's a waste of time and energy blaming your failures on the system unless you've got some evidence. But unfortunately on college campuses, and from the left more broadly, there's been this notion that America is bad, and the reason that you fail is because America has historically been very bad. Right? This is the identity politics of the left. Because America's bad in that it targets you. Right? America targets you. And we have an entire hierarchy of intersectionality that's been built by the left to tell you whether your views are legitimate or not. I mean, the more victimized you are, the more legitimate your views are. So, the hierarchy goes something like this. The people whose views are most valuable and who have been most victimized. At the very top are people who are LGBT, and then you get black people, and then you get women, and then you get Hispanic people, and then you get Native Americans, and then you get Asians, and then you get Jews maybe above Asians, maybe Jews, then Asians, and then the very, very bottom, you get straight white males, right? Those are the people who have nothing to say about anything because obviously they are the beneficiaries of this white privilege system. Now, the logic of intersectionality, because it suggests that the value of your opinion lies in your ethnic identity, in your group identity, the idea is that if I attack your ideas, if I say that you have bad ideas, what I am really doing is attacking you personally. I'm really attacking your identity. I'm aggressing you. You might require counseling. Right? This is the philosophy of microaggressions. My words are violence. Even the term microaggression suggests that it is an aggression against you, right? Microaggressions. I am aggressing you. It's an act of violence. As NYU social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has said, microaggressions are small actions or word choices that seem on their face to have no malicious intent, but that are thought of as a kind of violence nonetheless. The thing is, you don't actually have to intend to offend anyone to microaggress them. They just have to feel offended. And the thing is that microaggressions are actual violence. This is why you see the dolts outside shouting that speech is violence, because they think that I'm actually doing them violence when they don't hear me. Right? But if they would hear me, then presumably I'd be doing them violence and they would need counseling, and if they act with violence, it's because it's in response. And unfortunately, this university engages in precisely this sort of damaging attitude. So at the same time they are willing to allow the police to fight Antifa, they are fostering an attitude that says that certain types of speech are violence, which is the gas in the tank for groups like Antifa. It's the gas in the tank for the hard left. And before my arrival, the university obviously put in place all sorts of security measures to stop people from getting violent, which is great. But they also put out a letter. And they put out a letter to all the students here, and here's what it said. It said that I was a threat because they were going to offer, quote, support and counseling services for students, staff, and faculty. We are deeply concerned about the impact some speakers may have on individuals' sense of safety and belonging. No one should be made to feel threatened or harassed simply because of who they are or what they believe. For that reason, the following support services are being offered and encouraged, and they offer employee support services and student support services. You see, I'm attacking your identity if we disagree about politics, and you may require counseling. By the way, just side note, if you require counseling because of this speech, let me suggest to you that it was a mistake for you to have foregone psychiatric treatment long ago. I know, I'm super scary. Look at me, I'm physically intimidating, as everyone knows. Right? I mean, I understand. You're afraid I'm going to turn into the Hulk and ruin your life. Okay, but the truth is, I think that you're big boys and big girls, and you can probably handle it. I assume you're not a bunch of weaklings and pansies and snowflakes. That may not be a fair assumption, but I will assume it for the sake of this argument. I assume you can handle disagreement. If, in fact, you cannot handle disagreement, you are making your life harder, and you're making your life worse, and you are making the country worse. You're driving political polarization by failing to engage on a level of discussion. As you know, we're going to do a Q&A after this, and I love taking questions, my favorite thing, and I have a rule, which is if you disagree with me, you raise your hand and you go to the front of the line, because discussion makes the country better. But you feeling insulted and then whining about it, and then suggesting that you're a victim without evidence and that I have victimized you because I won't accept your victimhood, this makes the country a worse place. So I want to go briefly through a couple of the intersectional hierarchy groups, people who feel they're victims in American society, and explain why you are not, in fact, a victim. Why you need to take control of your own life and become an adult. So let's start with the idea that poor people in America are victimized. And this is sort of the Bernie Sanders case. Income inequality is the root of all evil. This Antifa's case that communism or anarchism would be a better solution than, say, a free and civil society that's raised half the world out of abject poverty. Right. Income inequality is not the big problem. Nobody rich is making you poor. Bill Gates did not make you poor. Bill Gates provided you a product, and if you bought it, that is your fault. Okay, the upper middle class grew from 12% of Americans in 1979 to 30% as of 2014. That is a massive growth in the upper middle class. The rich are not making you poorer. They are paying your salary. American income mobility, by the way, is just as strong as European countries with far more redistribution. Income mobility drops only when you drop out of high school or you have a baby out of wedlock. Okay, this is what makes you poor. Okay, how about the idea that if you're black in America, there's a white supremacist hierarchy that is keeping you down? Now listen, you'd be a fool not to acknowledge, or a liar not to acknowledge, the history of racism in America. Everybody acknowledges that if you have half a brain. Of course, slavery, Jim Crow, awful, evil treatment at the hands of awful, evil people. We all acknowledge this. We all acknowledge the collective sin of the United States in promulgating this, and the individual sins, more importantly, of the people who actually promulgated this stuff. Okay, we all get that. But that's not what we're talking about. Now we're talking about now. Okay, because I wasn't born when Jim Crow was in place. I wasn't an adult when Jim Crow was in place. I know that I'm not a racist, and I know I haven't acted in a racist manner. And I would bet you money that the people in this room haven't acted in a racist manner, that they haven't held slaves or voted for Jim Crow. I would bet you money that is the case. You cannot fix past injustices with current injustices. The only way to fix past injustices is with individual freedom. That's it. Okay, the idea that black people in the United States are disproportionately poor because America is racist, that's just not true. At least not in terms of America's racism today keeping black people down. It's just not the case. If that were the case, then you'd have to look at group income and decide based on group income who's been victimized the most and who the country was built for. Well, by that standard, the country was built by Asians. Okay, because the racial group with the highest median income in the United States is Asians. The Constitution was not written by a bunch of people who speak Korean. Because the Constitution is a document of freedom, not a document of ethnicity. So here are the three rules. You want to be rich in America? You want to do well in America? You want to put aside the whining about the system? Again, you point out to me an individual instance of racism, I will stand next to you and fight it. But if you want to whine about America, no good. Okay, here are the three rules that you need to fulfill as a person before you can start complaining about your life failures being the result of somebody else's actions. Number one, you need to finish high school. Number two, you need to get married before you have babies. Number three, you need to get a job. That's it. You do those things, you will not be permanently poor in the United States of America. According to the Brookings Institute, 2% of Americans who follow these rules are in poverty, 75% have joined the middle class. But what about racism? 71% of poor families with children are unmarried. The poverty rate among non-married white families was 22% in 2008. That same year, the poverty rate among black married couples was less than 7%. But what happened to racism? Why weren't those black married couples poorer than the single white moms? Because it doesn't have to do with color. It has to do with life decisions. And we can talk about differentials in crime and where these statistics come from. I mean, the basic rule is that if you don't commit crime, you're not going to be arrested for it. The police are not going around arresting black people for the fun of it. They're going around arresting criminals based on criminal reports, which is why the number of criminal reports based on race matches up exactly with the number of criminal arrests based on race. Okay, if you don't report people for crime, it's hard for the police to know to pick them up. Okay, how about women? This idea that women are vastly victimized in our society. Hillary Clinton is making buco dollars off of this nonsense this week. As I tweeted earlier this week we found out that a clown can emerge from the woods and scare half Americans, and also it came out. But Hillary Clinton Hillary Clinton is going around whining about how there's a glass ceiling and she couldn't break through it. It's all because of sexism. It's not because she was the world's worst candidate and a pretty appalling human being. No, it's because everybody is a sexist. Everybody's a sexist. And we hear in this context very much about the wage gap, right? The idea that women are paid significantly less than men, 72 cents on the dollar. Okay, that's absolute sheer nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. In 147 out of 150 of the biggest cities in America, women make 8% more money than men do in their peer group. That wage gap is growing, not shrinking. At colleges, 55% of women in college are women. That gap is getting larger. 58% of all graduate degrees go to women. Okay, the majority of voters are women. If we are living in a place where women are vastly victimized by men, I'd really like to see that place. And as far as this idea that there's a vast rape epidemic going on campus, every rape, as I have said 1,000 times, every rape should be dealt with by the prosecution of the rapist, ending with their jailing, castration, or death. Okay, that's how I feel about rape. But this nonsense statistic has been presented that 1 in 5 women on college campuses is being raped. It's just not true. It's just not true. The actual statistic, according to the Department of Justice, is something like 1 in every 58. Obviously far too high, but not 1 in 5. If it were 1 in 5, by the way, if you're a woman at this campus, you should go to your parents and ask them what kind of nuts they are to send you in a war zone where you're likely to be raped. Okay. How about the idea that gays and lesbians are really living under the boot of American society? Well, in terms of income, they certainly aren't. Okay, certainly not in terms of income. Women in lesbian couples make far more money than women in straight couples do. Men in gay couples make slightly less than men in straight couples, but same-sex couples with both partners in the labor force make $8,000 more per year than straight couples, and they are typically higher educated. Okay, so that talks about the identity politics, this intersectional hierarchy of the left. But there's another group that engages in identity politics that I want to talk about now. And it's the battle between the identity politics of the left and the identity politics of the so-called alt-right that is really making the country a significantly worse place, and it needs to stop now because it is utter and complete horrible bullshit. The first thing to note, this notion that the alt-right is actually conservative is nonsense. Let me define what I mean by alt-right, because not everybody who likes Pepe memes or Harambe memes is a member of the alt-right. Okay, not everybody that the left says is alt-right is actually alt-right. I mean, the left calls me alt-right, which is patently insane. I mean, you legitimately have to have a screw loose to call me alt-right. I spend half my career attacking the alt-right. Okay, what is the alt-right? So the alt-right are a group of people who believe that ideology and ethnicity are inextricably intertwined, just like the identity politics left, right? On the identity politics left, if you're a black person who is a leftist, you're a leftist because you're a black person. On the identity politics right, Western civilization was not built by people with good ideas, it was built by people with white skin. And that means that people who don't have white skin cannot properly assimilate into Western civilization. This has no grounding in reality. The fact is that there were lots of white people in Britain before the Romans arrived, and they weren't living a civilized life, as we would currently call it, under Western civilization. Okay, in fact, the people who, the Romans, right, when Italians were coming to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, there was tremendous discrimination against Italians because they weren't considered properly white. The definition of white moves around a lot based on convenience. Right? Sometimes Jews are white, sometimes Jews are not white. It sort of depends on what you're talking about. But according to the alt-right, because ideology and race are inextricably intertwined, they must have a white identity politics all their own. If there's a group of people who are fighting for the group identity politics of blacks, or of women, or of gays and lesbians, then there has to be a white group that fights back on behalf of the white race. As you may have noticed, I think all of this is disgusting. Okay, Western civilization is not built on race. There have been lots of countries all over Europe that were not particularly civilized and were quite white. Freedom, personal responsibility, separation of powers, God-given rights protected by a government elected with the consent of the government. These are the values of Western civilization. But the alt-right actually overtly rejects these ideas. They say the Constitution is outmoded, that it doesn't work. They say the government for white people is necessary and good because you can't assimilate people to so-called white culture. They hang out with neo-Nazis because a lot of them actually believe some of the same things that the neo-Nazis believe. White supremacy. Now, let's be straight about this. This is like 10,000 people across the country. Okay, this is not 1 million people. This is not 10 million people. This is not 63 million people. It's not 200 million deplorables. It's a very small select group of absolutely terrible people who believe absolutely terrible things. But they're getting a lot of attention and coverage right now because we live in a reactionary moment. A lot of the people are reacting to the identity politics of the left by making nice with the alt-right. There's this weird notion on the right that if you drink leftist tears, that's enough. Right? Drinking leftist tears is enough. So if the alt-right takes off the left, they're fine. Okay, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. I have no other word for it. Okay, you actually have to stand. It is not enough to stand against bad ideologies. You must also stand for a good ideology. You must stand for a good philosophy. Okay, you cannot stand with bad people just because you think those bad people make your enemies cry. The enemy of your enemy in a country where we're all supposed to be friends is not only bad strategy, it destroys the country wholesale. So, how do we solve all this, right? We're on campus and we're hearing the identity politics of the left, and then you watch the news and you see the identity politics of the alt-right. How do you solve all of this? Well, the way that you solve all of this, first of all, let's start with the campus thuggery. The way you solve all that is by letting the police do their jobs. Okay, administrators need to let the police do their jobs. None of this would have gone anywhere if back in February, when Milo, who I significantly dislike, when Milo came to speak, if they had allowed the police to do their jobs and arrest everyone who even hinted at violence. Okay, people who get violent should be arrested and they should spend time in jail. And the authorities have a responsibility to allow the police to do their jobs. And this is not the fault of the cops. This is the fault of cowardly political actors who pusillanimous cowards who hide behind their desks every time some people on the left whine a little bit. Okay, the second thing that has to happen is you have to stop seeing everybody in America as an enemy who despises you based on identity. Again, they don't care about you. You're not that important a human. Okay, not that many of us know each other. Not that many of us care about each other. We care about our families. We care about our friends. And we certainly don't want to stop each other. We mostly want to be treated civilly. And we can all do that if we stop looking into each other's eyes and seeing a potential enemy instead of seeing somebody who's just a person who probably doesn't care about you very much and doesn't want to stop you and doesn't mind what you do. This is not difficult stuff. And finally, stop seeing yourself as a victim, because in order to see everybody else as an enemy, which justifies your violence and hate against them, you have to see yourself as their victim. Again, America is the greatest country in human history. You are not a victim. If you are a victim of something, you need to show me what you are a victim of, and I will stand beside you. But do not blame the freest, most civil society in the history of planet Earth for your failures, because that's on you. Now, is that so rough? I mean, did we need $600,000 of security to hear all of that? I have a feeling the vast majority of people who are protesting this speech have never heard of me. I'm not arrogant enough to believe that Antifa sits around watching Thug Life videos. If they did, I doubt they would be members of Antifa. But the idea that they're out there protesting, they're out there maybe getting violent, apparently 4 people have been arrested for carrying weapons already. The idea that all that is happening is indicative of the fact that we have stopped seeing each other as individuals. We are all individuals. I'm an individual with a particular point of view. I am not a cardboard cutout for you to call a white supremacist. I am not a cardboard cutout for you to call a Nazi. And neither is anybody else in this room. Get to know people. Get to know their views. Discuss. Debate. That is what America is all about. If we all do that, I do think that America can see a better day, because I think we're in a dark moment right now. But I think we can get to a brighter moment if we stop seeing each other as members of groups and identifying as members of groups primarily, and instead see each other as individuals made in God's image, one with equal value to another in God's eyes. If we do that, America will see a resurgence. Thank you so much. All right. Now the fun part. So, we're going to do Q&A, and I believe there's a microphone down here on the left. As always, my rule is that if you raise your hand because you disagree, you get to go to the front of the line.
We are indeed going to do a Q&A. This is by far the most fun point, I would think. Correct, guys? Yeah. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Berkeley red tape and fire code is going to require everyone who wants to ask a question to walk out and around and form a line over there on the outside of the lobby right there. We're going to have an usher ushering people in. After you ask your question, there's a green arrow following this way. You're going to stand right here on this X, and you're going to walk to the back. Even if you're sitting in the front, you're going to have to walk all the way back and into the other doors over there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll wait for the first one.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Thank you for coming. I do not disagree with a lot that you just said. That's why I'm here. Yeah, so let's talk about institutions, because you're saying we should not blame the institutions. I have an example, and please tell me why you think, that person per se is not victimized. So let's start with the beginning of a life. You're a baby, you were born into a really poor family, in a really poor community, where the school is not good, where crimes are high. You as a baby, I think, you're quite helpless there, and according to my thinking, I would say that's quite unequal, and that is. I feel like that person, because if you think about education, that should be a public good. In my opinion, it should be provided equally in all communities instead of just based on how rich your house is. Could you respond to that?
So if I'm getting your question straight, there's a bit of an echo here. So you're suggesting that children grow up in unequal circumstances because of the school district they go to. Not all schools are equal. There are a lot of public schools that are garbage, and so kids don't have an equal access to success.
Yes, and I feel like in my world, in my political thinking, I think that is inequality, and that is institutions failing people.
So I agree with you that not all public schools are good, and I agree with you that there is such a thing as inequality. Of course there's such a thing as inequality. We're not all born in the same place. We're not all born equally intelligent. We're not all born with equal gifts. Some of us are born smart but short. We'll never play in the NBA. We're not all born. This is just a truism. The question is there inequity? Right? Is there an equity that needs to be remedied? And the question then is, what's the best way to remedy that inequity? So when you say that there's inequality, is that because there are a bunch of rich people who are screwing those poor kids out of a good school? I don't think so, because we're spending oodles of money in the public schools, particularly in poor areas, and it's not paying off very well. What I would suggest is that the best possible solution is to devolve those dollars back to parents who presumably care about those kids more than the public school system does, and allow them to choose the schools for their children. So I can agree with you that there's inequality. Then the question becomes, okay, how do we solve that problem? So again, inequality and inequity are not the same thing, and equating the two, I think, is a mistake. You can go follow up, that's fine.
Thank you. So I feel like, if we're getting really scholarly and academic here, that is exactly what Rousseau is saying, essentially talking about natural inequality and contrived inequality. Natural inequality would be inequality that you're saying, inequity would be the contrived one. And I feel like now in our society here, in the institutions, is contributing to the ultimate contrived inequality, in the sense that public, children just do not have access to the same level of education. Granted, if they
so if we're going to construct utopia and then suggest all children are going to have the same level of education, that's just not reality. Okay? There's no place on earth that has that, because that's just not the case. So you're right that there's a difference between difference in smarts and difference in the poverty situation in which you grew up. But the truth is that the biggest inequality I would say, is parents who decide to get pregnant out of wedlock. I mean, if you want to look at academic underperformance, it has much less to do with the school that you go to and much more to do with your family situation at home. Again, I'm not arguing with you that any of these things are a problem. The question is, quote unquote, who's to blame? And I think this is where we get into a problem in politics, because the idea is that the person to blame must be the rich guy down the street. I don't think it's the rich guy's fault. I think that there are certain things in life that just aren't fair. And then the question becomes, okay, how do we maximize opportunity without invading the rights of somebody else? And I think the easiest way to do that is to let people keep more of their own money and to do more to privatize the school system and give people more choice. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's great. They reveal them from behind a curtain and then they walk forth. It's like a game show.
Hey Ben, I'm honored to be the second participant in this game show. But you made the argument that the gender pay gap is a myth.
Yes.
And one of the main reasons that this is the case is because that female STEM education is at a lower level than it is for men. Females are continually discouraged to not go into STEM fields at a rate that's much lower than men are. So I was wondering what you feel about this argument, and do you think it should be remedied, or nothing?
Well, I mean, I think that it's a free country. You can choose what profession to go into. If the idea is that the pay gap is largely due to profession choice. That's obviously true. If you look at a lot of dangerous professions, firemen, people who work on oil rigs, it tends to be men because men want to go into those professions. It's also true that men tend to spend more hours in the workplace. It's also true that women tend to take more time off with babies. That's not a bad thing, by the way. It's not a rip on women. It's always bewildering to me when feminists are like, it's terrible that women take time off to be with their babies. Why? I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think there is a societal discouragement for women to go into these particular fields. I was wondering if, like, you as like a mom,
I don't see a ton of evidence that there's societal disparagement of women going into being a firefighter. What I actually see is that there's an affirmative action program in many of these cases for women going into things like firefighting, because there's now an affirmative attempt to get women.
I was referring to STEM fields like science, technology.
So the STEM. Okay, so James Damore has an interesting memo that got him fired from Google on this. But it is certainly true that when you look at, for example, what women major in college, the number of women who major in STEM studies, which has nothing to do with getting a job and pay, women major in humanities much more than men do. Men are just interested in this stuff more. That's not a terrible thing. I don't see why that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, there's societal influence that occurs even before the college level, right? I mean,
I don't know that there are a lot of people saying to a 7th grade girl who's good at math, you need to stop that and go read some poetry. Listen, I have 3 younger sisters, right? I have my wife is a doctor, by the way. So talking about STEM, my wife's a doctor. My mom runs companies. That's what she does. So I'm very much for women in the workplace and being able for them to choose what they want to choose. I really don't see a lot. If you can tell me the person who's out there going, women in science, fi, then I'll stand with you and say, yeah, that person's adult. That's really stupid. You know, if a woman wants to go into science and she's qualified for the job the same way that an equally qualified guy is, great. What I don't want is lowering of standards in science to meet any particular person, and I also don't want this idea that because a woman chooses not to go into science, and a lot of women choose not to go into science, and that creates a disproportionate percentage based on individual choice, that suddenly this is some sort of group discrimination happening in front of us.
Hi, first off, I just want to say thank you for speaking as a fellow Jewish conservative. Thank you so much for coming.
It's just the 2 of us, man.
So I wanted to ask you, do you believe that there's an explanation for why victimization has become the main tactic of the far left to gain support of the people?
Yes. So I think, first of all, I do think victimization was always a tactic of the far left. It was just economic victimization, right? Marxism is based on the idea that the proletariat are going to rise up and overthrow the bourgeois, that there's this vast group of underprivileged people, as they call it, who are going to rise up and they're going to break the chains that bind them and take over the world. So it was always based on this notion that you're being victimized by somebody else. But in the 1960s particularly, it was clear that as America was thriving so much in the 1950s economically, and America had become this great world power, the prominent world power in terms of the economy, it was very hard to make the case to people who were not as wealthy that you need to rise up against the country that's creating all your wealth. And so instead, what the left decided to do was misdirect into a legitimate grievance, which was an ethnic-based and sex-based grievance, which made a lot more sense in the 1950s and 60s than it does in 2017. And so there's this idea that if we identify you as groups, we can use those groups to tear down the American infrastructure, this system that's been built by white men for the privilege of white men. And we couldn't tear that down based on class, because it turns out a lot of poor people in the United States still wanted to get rich, and they need that system to get rich. But you can do it based on group identity, because if you can make women feel that the system is designed to keep them down, if you can make black people feel like the system is designed to keep them down, and then you can tell them that it's the capitalist system more generally that is designed to keep them down, and that whole system, the whole superstructure is rife with racism, it has to be torn out root and branch. If you can do that, then you can actually build a movement on the back of that. And that's what you're seeing in the Democratic Party actually right now. It's fascinating to watch the conflict between sort of the Obama identity politics Democratic Party and the Bernie Sanders socialist Democratic Party. Because that's actually an old battle, right? I mean, that's the battle between economic, class distinction-based victimization and identity politics-based victimization, which is really more what Obama used in 2012 to win re-election.
So would you say this is more of like get-rich-quick scheme, or if I can't be rich, no one can?
Well, I think that it depends on which people you're talking about. The people who buy into the idea of victimization, I don't think it's a get-rich-quick scheme so much as an I feel victimized scheme and I don't feel like taking responsibility. But for the people at the top, I think that it actually is a get-rich-quick scheme. I think the people at the top very often know exactly what they're doing and know, because they don't live like this, right? I mean, Barack Obama didn't live his life thinking of himself as a dramatic victim of society until he decided to write Dreams for My Father and revise everything, right? But the fact is that Barack Obama is a guy who really achieved his whole life. I mean, he was an achiever. And if he had been sitting around thinking how victimized he was his whole life, it would have been very difficult for him to get where he got.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hey, Ben. Given that the single biggest predictor of intergenerational poverty is whether an individual was raised in a single or a two-parent household, would you be for or against an affirmative action policy where the institution gives preferential treatment to applicants who are raised in a single-parent household, or do you believe that that kind of policy would give rise to more problems of its own?
Right, so here's my view on affirmative action. I don't believe that you should lower standards in order to let people in because you're disadvantaging somebody else, and you shouldn't do it by color. So let me put it this way. If you have a white applicant who scored 1,400 on their SATs, well, sorry, I understand they changed the system now, 2,100 on their SATs, and they want to go to a good school, and you have and that person grew up in a single family, a single parent family, impoverished, and you have a black person who's Colin Powell's kid who scores exactly the same score, then I think that if you're going to look at all the factors, you can say, okay, the person who had to overcome all these obstacles to get the same score deserves to get in. But that's based on overcoming obstacles. That's a character judgment. That is not a judgment on the basis of race. And I also don't think that it's a hard and fast rule with regard to single motherhood. Again, if you are the single child, if you're the kid who is the child of some famous Hollywood actress and grew up in the lap of luxury versus you grew up in Appalachia or the inner city with two parents, I think you have to look at totality of the circumstances, in other words.
Okay, one more thing.
Sure.
Who do you think is the smartest person on the left?
The smartest person alive?
On the left.
On the left. Okay, sorry. The smartest person, yeah, those are two very different questions. The smartest person on the left. Well, points to the Lena Dunham shouting guy. Let's see. I do think that, I mean, in terms of pure intelligence, I think that there are a lot of scientists who are on the left, you know. Like, I wouldn't want to get into a scientific debate with Stephen Hawking or Richard Dawkins. I mean, they're in a different field of specialty. So are you talking pure IQ or in terms of making good political arguments?
In terms of, like, your political rival, like, who would be, like, an intellectual rival for you in terms of...
I mean, I think there are people who I'd be interested to talk to about policy. You know, I think that when I was at Harvard Law School, there were a bunch of professors who were on the left, including Elizabeth Warren, actually, who she was relatively interesting to talk to, although got less so over time. There's a guy named Richard Parker, who's a professor there, who I really liked. Lonnie Guinier, who was a professor there, who actually ended up writing me a law firm recommendation. She was such a leftist that she was, I believe, nominated for Undersecretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, and a Democratic Senate rejected her because she was so far left. She was a smart lady. Again, I don't think that all leftists are stupid or anything. I think that they start from wrong foundational principles, and if you're a smart person starting from the wrong principles, you can reason your way into virtually anything.
Thank you.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for coming. As someone who is left-leaning, I truly believe in freedom of speech, and I think that that is a principle that...
Well, thank you for coming.
So my question was about abortion, and I just wanted to know, why exactly do you think a first trimester fetus has moral value?
Okay, so a first trimester fetus has moral value because whether you consider it a potential human life or a full-on human life, it has more value than just a cluster of cells. If left to its natural processes, it will grow into a baby. So the real question is, where do you draw the line? So you're going to draw the line at the heartbeat, because it's very hard to draw the line at the heartbeat. There are people who are adults who are alive because of a pacemaker. They need some sort of outside force generating their heartbeat. Okay, you're going to do it based on brain function. Okay, well, what about people who are in a coma? Should we just kill them? Right? The problem is, anytime you draw any line other than the inception of the child, you end up drawing a false line that can also be applied to people who are adults. So either human life has intrinsic value or it doesn't. I think we both agree that adult human life has intrinsic value. Can we start from that premise?
I believe that sentience is what gives something moral value, not necessarily being a human alone.
Okay, so when you're asleep, can I stab you?
I'm still considered sentient when I'm asleep.
Okay, if you are in a coma from which you may awake, can I stab you?
Well then, no.
I'm I'm glad you answered that because I have no interest in actually murdering you.
But that's still potential sentience, and it's still a potential.
I agree. It is potential sentience. You know what else is potential sentience? Being a fetus.
The issue with that. The issue I have with that, though, is that if I'm in a coma and I'm not like doing anything to anyone, I'm not causing any issues amongst the world. Whereas an unwanted child may or may not be a burden to people.
Okay, there are lots of people who are unwanted, right? I mean, there are lots of people's parents who are unwanted, right? We're a bunch of college students. The problem is that now you're shifting the argument, right? Before you were making the argument based on the intrinsic value of a life based on sentience, and now you're talking about the level of burden that somebody presents as a separate moral argument. Okay, I don't believe that you being a burden on somebody is justification for them killing you, as a general rule.
I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate you and thank you.
No, thanks.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. You have consistently praised the free market as the most effective means by which to combat racism, sexism, etc. Correct?
Yes.
Right? You believe legislation prohibiting such behaviors is essentially unneeded in today's day and age because you have faith that people, such as yourself, are conscious enough to fight discrimination in business where it can be shown, and at the end of the day, a business should be given immense freedom to conduct itself in pursuit of profit. My question is as follows. If insurance companies can charge young males as a group higher prices for car insurance than young females, because the former has statistically been shown to be more reckless drivers, does this not leave open the possibility in a free market system for insurance companies to charge premiums based on certain ethnic or racial categories if these ethnic or racial categories statistically correlate with more reckless driving? If you object to the notion of charging someone more based on a factor that that person has virtually no agency in choosing, such as race or sex, why do you not condemn the fact that young men have to pay more? If you do not object to the possibility that a person of a certain sex, ethnic, or racial group may have to pay more on that basis, then are you not failing to disavow discriminatory business practice?
Okay, so that's a long paragraph, but I think what it really boils down to, the answer is that what you're now conflating ethnic racism with risk factors. Okay, I don't conflate racism with risk factors, meaning if you are saying that insurance companies may use being black as a proxy for heart disease, for example, because black men suffer from heart disease at a higher rate than white men do at the same age once you hit a certain age, then my answer is that insurance companies in the business of assessing risk, not in the business of assessing racism. So if they look at you and they say that this is a higher risk factor, I mean another case, sickle cell anemia, right? There are certain diseases that actually do afflict races differently. Tay-Sachs affects Jews differently. So the answer is you're an insurance company. Of course you're going to charge more to somebody who has a higher risk factor. That's not racism. That's just the profit motive. I'm not saying that everyone's going to get charged the same in an insurance scheme. Of course not. I assume that you and I won't be charged the same. I'm older than you, presumably. They'll measure our bodily health. I don't know how much pot you smoke. Like, they'll make a bunch of distinctions. You know, they'll make a bunch of decisions as to what our risk factors are and how that measures out in terms of what I need to pay in order to cover my projections. But that has nothing to do with quote-unquote discrimination. That's just a basic market decision. Right. That's actuarial. That's
so just for clarification, so there was a study in which I forgot what organization of the United States federal government did it, but Native Americans in Arizona were found to have, to essentially be engaged in fatal car crashes at a higher rate than any other group.
Okay.
You think it's perfectly permissible for insurance companies to charge someone just charge someone an extra premium by virtue of the fact that they are Native American in Arizona?
No, I think it's fair for an insurance company to charge someone based on the risk factor of driving. So what I would suggest is that in a free market system, and this is why I defend the free market system, let's say there was an insurance company who did what you're talking about. Right? And the insurance company decided Native Americans get charged more.
Okay.
There would be another insurance company that would come along and they would say, okay, is it really true that Native Americans universally are being charged more, or can I undercut my competitor by looking at people on an individual level and looking at all of their risk factors apart from race? Because race is not inherently linked to drunk driving.
With males, because for instance, not all males, are going to be in and of themselves like more reckless drivers than females. However, like as you said, neither is that the case.
But this is why, let's be real about this. This is why car insurance companies have good driver discounts, for example. They have good student discounts, right? They actually do look at more than you just, like my insurance rates went up through the ceiling when I got caught going down the I-5 at 113 and had my license suspended for a month. They've gone down since because I haven't had a ticket for 5 years. So, this is, so the point that I'm making is that if you are suggesting that, if you're trying to line up discrimination with market-based profit, If your question is there, can you imagine a situation in which a business makes more money by discriminating, and would that be okay? Then the answer would be, it's a business, you can do what you want in a free society, and I have no right to use your services. However, it has yet to come to my attention that racial discrimination in a business is an actual profitable thing over time in a free market system where people can compete, because race is not inherently connected to behavioral categories, right? The basis of racism is that race is connected to behavior.
Well, I'd just like to say, for instance, Thomas Sowell pointed out, like in his book, Black Rednecks, White Liberals, or whatever.
Yes.
That the Irish.
It's actually, right. It's white. Yeah, you're right. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Right.
It's a good book, yeah.
I got that data for you.
You got it.
He pointed out that the Irish, for instance, were in the Americas for hundreds upon hundreds of years, locked in destitute, grinding poverty.
Right.
Okay, so you just said that race, you know, if you're a company and you institute racist policies, won't, like there's no long-term gain to be made from those policies. And right. I think that that's erroneous to say, because as you know, inequalities, disparities do exist between certain communities. So
you'd have to show me the disparity based on race and why it's biologically inborn as opposed to cultural.
I'm not trying to say that it's not biologically born. I'm just saying that if you had a policy whereby you... Okay.
I don't want you to confound. Here's the problem I'm having, and I think we can stop at this. I don't want to confound race with behavior unless you can show me that race is the inherent source of the behavior. And if it is the inherent source of behavior, then we can have a separate discussion. But I don't see that. And if you show me that race is in fact that, then that's a separate discussion as to whether we have to force businesses not to take race into account. Is that fair?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Ben.
Hey, how's it going?
Farther north in California, predominantly conservative rating. And my question is, are you familiar with the Jefferson State movement? And if so, what do you think about it?
I'm sorry, I missed it. The echo.
Are you familiar with the Jefferson State movement? And if so, what do you think about it?
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, the secession effort.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I am familiar with it. I think that California is far too large and encompasses far too many different people of different political orientations for it to have this many electoral votes. That said, I think that the chances of separating California into, from a political point of view, the chance of separating California into 3 or 4 states with, 6 or 8 senators, that could be a very dangerous thing for the balance of the country.
Okay, thank you.
Hey Ben, Bert, this is a two-parter, PSA and question. So PSA is that even though there was a bunch of standby tickets and there was a line out the door, the administration revoked all the standby tickets for all those people, and I think that that should be openly shunned. That's totally bad.
Yeah, I did hear that, and that's egregious. I mean, obviously, look at this. I mean, we've got empty seats here, and the only reason we had more than 3,000 people signed up for this event. The administration cut off the upper balcony because they were apparently afraid that Antifa was going to somehow rip out the bolted down seats and fling them onto the people below. I'm not joking. Like, this was the actual excuse that they gave. And then we thought, okay, there were going to be a bunch of people who signed up on the left to get tickets and didn't show up, specifically so there would be empty seats. And as you say, hundreds of people showed up outside and were not allowed in because the administration seized the tickets. If it's for safety reasons...
It's cowardice.
Okay, I'll try to assume the best, that it's for safety reasons, but if it's cowardice, obviously it's cowardice and should be openly condemned.
All right, and so for my question, more towards drug use and the criminalization of drug use. I know that you don't particularly condone drug use, but how do you feel about the criminal justice system, with all these nonviolent offenders, all the money that we spend on all the nonviolent offenders and drug use openly? I mean, so maybe drug use is bad, but should we still criminalize it and treat those people the way that we do and lose money like that?
I am actually libertarian on drugs. So that means that... So let me be clear about this. People who smoke dope annoy the living crap out of me, and they smell terrible. That said, if you want to smoke dope and lose brain cells, then that's your problem, so long as you're not coming to me for a handout. I think that there are certain drugs, like, for example, PCP, that apparently makes you violent, and that has externalities. That's something that you have to talk about policing. You have to talk about policing in terms of, selling drugs to minors. But it doesn't seem to me that when you're talking about things like marijuana, for example, you couldn't police marijuana in the same way that you police cigarettes or alcohol. just make it very difficult to sell to people who are underage. The biggest problem that you have right now is that marijuana is so plentiful in places like California that even legalizing it is not going to get rid of the black market, because it actually, the price is higher in the legal market than it would be on the black market. So that's a serious problem, and suggests that deregulation is actually possibly a worthwhile thing. There are some, I'll admit that I'm split on some substances. Like, obviously, when you look at the opioid epidemic and you see the addictive level of that, marijuana is slightly different because the evidence for addictiveness and then marijuana is mixed at best. But when you talk about opioids, which are actually addictive, the higher level regulation of opioids seems to me not inappropriate.
So to clarify my question, do you think that we should still be criminalizing these non-violent offenders in regards to any drug?
Again, it depends on the offense. So if you're selling dope to a minor, yes, that should be criminal. If you are smoking dope in your room, then no, I don't think that should be criminal.
All right, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. So I'd like to first qualify my question before making it. So, Mr. Shapiro, as a conservative intellectual, I respect you deeply, and I agree with you on a host of issues. However, there is one where I disagree with you, which is what we should do about climate change. While I agree with you that we should be skeptical of climate alarmists, I cannot help but think of Pascal's wager. If the skeptics are right, we have nothing to lose. But if they are wrong, then we have a world to lose. In a 1984 election advertisement, Ronald Reagan's campaign said, if you think there's a bear in the woods, you bring your gun. Given this maxim and Reagan's decision to protect the ozone layer by limiting CFCs via the Montreal Protocol, at a time when the science was very much split on whether or not the ozone layer could ever be repaired, would you support a revenue-neutral carbon tax that would be revenue-neutral in the sense that the tax would be balanced by lowering of taxes on like businesses and on individuals and things like that? Do you think that this would be a good insurance policy that would not necessarily give the command economists of the left what they want, but also entertain the possibility that maybe climate change is real and maybe we should do something about it?
Okay, so here's my position on climate change. I would say lukewarm on climate change in the sense that I think that the greenhouse gas effect has been proven in laboratories, that carbon emissions can make the world warmer. The question is the sensitivity of the climate to those greenhouse gas emissions, and how much is absorbed by the oceans, for example, and what effect that has on the climate long term, because the computer modeling has been so flawed thus far. That said, even if you believe that let's say that we take the IPCC estimate, right? The IPCC estimate is that we're supposed to increase, I think, by the end of the century by 7 degrees Fahrenheit is the global estimate. So that varies obviously place to place. That also means that you have to take into account cost. Right, so as far as the carbon tax, I haven't actually looked at the economics of what you're talking about specifically enough, but general regulations that have been proposed on carbon taxes talk about penalizing companies in such a way that the cost is passed on to the consumer. It seems to me that if you're going to create new taxes without dramatically lowering taxes, as you suggest, which is really what the left proposes, the left sort of proposes carbon taxes but no offsets, then you're going to end up with a situation where the cost of energy is passed on to the consumer, which leaves more people in poverty. And I think that pretending that there are no trade-offs when it comes to government regulation is foolhardy. I also think that the truth is that what we've seen is that greenhouse gas emissions are declining thanks to technological development. And for example, the easiest way to lower greenhouse gas emissions right now would be to build a bunch of nuclear power plants, which is something that the left in California has opposed for a very, very long time. We haven't had a nuclear power plant here for like 40 years. If you look at the rise of Tesla, the idea that there's not new technologies around the corner that are going to help us mitigate the emissions is foolhardy to me. I think that when Reagan says, bring a gun into the woods, if you see a bear, the question isn't whether you bring a gun into the woods. The question is whether, or if you suspected that a bear is there. The question isn't whether to bring a gun into the woods right now, based on the economists that I've looked at. The question is whether you should randomly wander around the woods in a tank. Right? Is that worthwhile? Because the kind of solutions that it seems the left is suggesting are necessary in order to actually curb what they think is coming are so dramatic that you would talk about really dramatically lowering the American and the global standard of living in order to combat an ill that may or may not happen. And even if it does happen, maybe easier to deal with 100 years from now. Our technology 100 years from now is going to be a lot better. And the idea, by the way, that people don't move populations is not true. I mean, population movement has been a consistent thing throughout human history.
Right, but what I'm specifically advocating for here is that the right to come up with its own policy in service of solving climate change. Right now, the discussion has been dominated by the type of people that you're talking about, who want to bring tanks into the forest randomly. Why I'm suggesting this carbon tax that is revenue neutral, that should be supported by conservatives, is because it is a better solution to a lot of what we're seeing on the left. And I think that conservative intellectuals like yourself, who have a lot of sway and who have media companies, could advertise this policy.
So I'd be happy to look. If you're asking me if I'll look at your proposal, the answer is yes. If you send me your proposal, I'll be happy to look at it. But I think that it's worth noting that there are actually three positions, right? One is that the free market and new efficiencies and new technologies will help curb this on its own, and that government regulation may not be the answer. Then there's the hard left position, which is we should take over everything. And then there's the position that you're advocating. So I'll have to look at your position and see where I think it stacks up in the vast scheme of things. But environmental regulations, I don't know many conservatives who are not in favor of some, at least minimal environmental regulations, because those are externalities that affect people beyond you, obviously.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm a senior, proud liberal. My question.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, still coming.
Whenever somebody on the left comes to one of my lectures, it's like an AA meeting. It's like, thank you, Caroline, for coming.
So my question is, since you believe abortion is the same as murder, do you believe women who get abortions, even when their lives or the child's life isn't in danger, should be put on trial for murder? Yes or no?
I think abortionists should be put on trial.
But I mean,
I don't think that women should be put on trial for a couple of different reasons. So the first reason is because I don't think that it is effective in deterring abortion to put women on trial for the killing of the unborn. The second reason is because I think that we in our society have unfortunately gotten to such a point that an entire generation have been indoctrinated to believe, particularly an entire generation of women, since that's what we're talking about here, have been indoctrinated to believe that a baby is a polyp, and so when they remove it, I'm not sure there's the actual mens rea necessary, the actual criminal intent necessary for a prosecution. So when we're talking about, the typical pro-life position here has been that the woman is a victim in abortion nearly as much as the baby is. That there's an entire abortion industry that is geared toward teaching women that babies are not babies, and that getting a baby aborted is in fact a betterment of their life. So no, I'm not in favor of prosecuting women for abortions.
But I mean, there are a lot of women who do have the intent, right? Like if a woman goes to an abortion clinic, they are ordering the murder of their child, in your opinion, like what you would say. So
well, again, so I gave you two reasons. One a public policy one, and one you'd have to show me. You'd really have to show me the case of a woman who went in there and said, "I know this is a baby, cut its brains out." If that's happening, then that is infanticide. I mean, that's like, wouldn't you acknowledge? I mean, if a woman walked in with a baby that was 1 day old and said, "Here's my baby, kill it," wouldn't you put her on trial? But that's not what we're talking about. In the vast majority of abortions, the truth is, unfortunately, that women don't actually believe they are killing a child. They actually believe they are killing something that is non-human and is the same thing as removing a tumor or something.
So, but are you saying that you don't think abortion is murder then? Because there are.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that I'm saying that the vast majority of women who obtain abortions don't think that abortion is murder, and intent is a fundamental element in any criminal prosecution. I feel horrible for women who have abortions. I think that it's terrible for them. I think it's a lot worse for the baby.
But obviously. I think what's key is, like you said, a vast majority, right? There are women out there who know that it is a child.
And you make law and public policy based on the vast majority, not on the outlying case.
Yeah, but then you can't make a claim that abortion is the same as murder if you wouldn't treat them the same in public policy or in law.
No, I absolutely can, because there are many types of murder, right? I mean, there's manslaughter.
Yeah.
There's unintentional murder.
I mean, like, what would your standards be?
So the doctor knows. That's why I'm saying the doctor has the mens rea. The doctor has the actual intent to commit a murder, because the doctor full well knows that is a baby in there who's beating hard, he or she is stopping.
So indirect manslaughter.
What was that?
So you would put them on trial for indirect manslaughter.
I would put Kermit Gosnell on trial for first-degree murder. I would put abortionists on trial for either second-degree murder or manslaughter. I mean, this is a crime against humanity that's occurring. And if you believe that, obviously, to be ideologically consistent, you have to say that. And this has been, again, the traditional pro-life position. I'm not aware of any major pro-lifer in America who believes that women should be put on trial for abortion.
Thank you.
Okay, hey Ben, my name's Andrew, and since DACA's been making a huge headlines throughout the whole nation, what do you think should we do now? Should it have been repealed? Should they have made it something else better, or should we continue having DACA?
I'm sorry, what was the
DACA.
Oh, DACA. Okay, so first of all, my position on immigration is I'm actually very libertarian on immigration, except for two factors. One is government payments that go to illegal immigrants, and the second is the cultural assimilation issue for people who come across the border illegally and aren't willing to assimilate into traditional American culture. Right? So these are two serious concerns. I'm not as concerned with the economics of illegal immigration in the sense that people who say we have to restrict our labor force in order to maintain a certain wage base, I don't think that's correct, because this is why you see companies that actually offshore and outsource, because they're looking for cheaper labor. It's always bewildering to me when conservatives say, well, we have to maintain a wage base by restricting the labor supply. Then why aren't you for raising the minimum wage? That does exactly the same thing. It restricts the labor supply and raises the wage base. So, as far as DACA goes, my view on DACA is that people who are here illegally, whether they were born here or whether they were brought here as small children or not, should be assessed on a one-by-one judgment. So I am not in favor of the blanket swath amnesty for millions of people based on how long they've been here. I'm in favor of looking at people one-on-one and saying, okay, this person's in college and looks like they're going to have a career and hasn't been taking welfare dollars. This person looks like they're a good American, or they want to be a good American. Put them in the back of the line on a pathway to legalization. But if you're here, you've taken welfare dollars, you're not going to school, you're not bettering yourself, you're not going to be a productive part of American society, you haven't imbibed basic American cultural hallmarks, you do that, you should go. I have the exact same standard for people who are currently here illegally as the people who want to enter legally. I have the same exact standard, except if you're here illegally, you go to the back of the line, you wait behind the people who came here legally.
Yeah! All right. Thanks for answering the question. Special shout out to my friend Corey.
Hi, Ben.
Howdy.
Howdy. I want my question. It's a little bit hard to articulate for me, so please just bear for like a minute. I wanted to ask you about the recent politically polarizing tendencies of the media and a way out. So I identified two problems in particular. It seems the American news media has evolved to I guess, promote sensationalism and intolerance toward other political views. I feel that this leads to a dangerous tendency for people to just choose their own media outlets in order to confirm their own biases. I hope you agree that this occurs with respect to all political affiliations. A little bit closer, maybe. Thanks. The other problem deals with fake news. Obviously, a term that's become like super nebulous. It's thrown around a great deal. But specifically with fake news, there are a lot of news websites that like dubious quality, and we hear stories how other countries or companies have used Facebook advertisements, for example, to promote to promote certain websites and sway easily impressionable opinions. So it's clear that Americans need, I guess everybody needs a basic access to reliable information. We need to have a reliable news media that informs the public. But it seems by default, Americans will seek out information that they find palatable. But this leads me to believe that it should be the burden of the news media to be reliable and not, I guess, vitriolic. So like in the past, we've had something I think was called the Fairness Doctrine that was revealed like a few decades ago that required outlets to present certain views. But obviously, government regulation towards media information, that's a slippery slope. What's the way out? What do you think the way out?
I think the way out is a more informed population, unfortunately, right? I think that the idea that the government should never be regulating speech or access to it. Once the government does that, then you're wandering into very dicey, quasi-fascistic territory. When it comes to consumers of media, look, the media are just going to provide you what you want to read. Okay, the media are going to provide you what you want to click on. And yes, I would say this, I think most of the people in the media, yes, even including the left-leaning media, do want to tell the truth. I think a lot of them don't recognize their own biases. Look, I'm conservative. That means the way that I cover the news is going to be from a conservative angle. I try to separate myself enough to say, okay, here's the facts and then here's my opinion. But everything that I say is coming from that point of view. I think one of the big problems in media is people don't do that, right? Like George Stephanopoulos tries to pretend he's an objective news source. Right? That doesn't mean everything he says is false, but it does mean that everything he says is coming from the former campaign spokesperson for Bill Clinton. And that should have an impact. So that means it's up to us to look at a variety of news sources. I recommend this all the time, right? Don't just listen to my podcast, go listen to Pod Save America. Don't just read Daily Wire, go over and check out Huffington Post. Make sure that you're reading a variety of news sources. If you actually want to tell what the facts are, the best way to do it is to read two opposing websites or two opposing outlets, and think of them as lines that intersect at one point, and the point at which they intersect is the factual point. And whatever those two stories have in common, you can take that as probably the grain of truth in the story.
Am I allowed a brief follow-up? Okay. So I guess I understand your emphasis on self-reliance, but evidently, to the extent that you believe that one believes in the efficiency of free markets, evidently people tend to move to confirm their own biases, and that's not occurring.
Well, I mean, I think that's why the founders relied on the idea that we were going to have a civically educated public. I mean, in the end, you're going to have to trust the people one way or another. I don't trust the government to regulate what the people see. I trust the government less to regulate what the people see than I do the people to educate themselves. And this one falls under the heading, as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system except for all the others. Right? Unfortunately, there's no way out of this box. People are going to have to inform themselves better. And yes, of course, people have a tendency toward confirmation bias. But that's why it's your job, if you know about confirmation bias, to suggest to people that maybe they should stop relying so much on their own confirmation bias.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
Hey Ben, my name is Rayhan, and I'm a Muslim and junior in high school, and I've been really trying to hammer in what I believe in. So I've been listening to conservatives recently, and you've been one of the main educators, so thank you for coming here.
Well, thank you.
So now, I think you go a bit far when you talk about inequality being one of the stupidest things to measure, because Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about the Gini coefficient. So they calculate income inequality in neighborhoods and streets, and it shows that it's just an increase in crime when you see your neighbor, earning more than you. So, do you have any response to that?
Yes. There's greater income inequality between Bill Gates and his neighbor than there is between anybody living in the inner city, and there's no crime in Bill Gates' neighborhood. So I would suggest that it has more to do with poverty in a neighborhood than it has to do with income inequality in a neighborhood.
Okay. And I had one more question. You talked about institutional racism and how it doesn't really exist. And I don't think you've digged up enough have you heard of bank lending discrimination? And it's been well.
Yes, okay, so bank lending discrimination, the idea of redlining was widely debunked in the early 2000s with regard to how banks operate. The idea that banks sit around and then they figure out, okay, there's a black guy and he has exactly the same credit score as a white guy, I'm not going to give him a loan. Banks base it on credit scores. If they didn't, they would go out of business. So, a lot of this has been wildly exaggerated. Again, if you can show me a bank that actually is redlining, then they will be prosecuted under federal law. That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You can't discriminate even in private businesses on the basis of race.
Yeah, J.P. Morgan Chase just had a settlement for $55 million for discriminating against Hispanics and blacks who had the same score as white people.
Right. Okay. So then they got punished under the law, and that's a good outcome.
Okay.
Again, that would be a case where I say that's a great example, singular case where somebody gets punished. They should be punished. And by the way, even if they weren't punished, let's say they weren't punished. Let's say you took my total libertarian theory: businesses should be able to do what they want. Then what you would suggest is that these people should have walked across the street to another bank that wasn't redlining them, and then they should have gotten a better loan.
But wouldn't you say J.P. Morgan Chase is an institution?
Well, as an institution, they did something bad, and I think capitalism makes them go bankrupt.
Right.
Again, I think discriminating against clients is a very easy way for you to go bankrupt.
All right. Thank you so much.
Shalom, I'm a huge fan of yours, by the way, I love your work. You mentioned that inalienable rights are given to us by God, but I've noticed that there is an argument to the contrary, posited by political philosopher Hillel Steiner. It consists of the following three things: the will theory, the interest theory, and Hofeldian deontic logic. The will theory states that rights govern our choices and come from our choices. But if we have the inability to make a choice or the incompetence to make a choice, then our rights can effectively be voided. The interest theory is the opposite. It says that we can't void our rights, but they can be affected by the breach of a duty by another party. So somebody else can take away our rights under the interest theory. Under Hofeldian deontic logic, there are four types of rights: privileges, claims, powers, and immunities. All of those cancel each other out and can be taken away at any time. Do you have any expertise on this? Can you offer an argument to the contrary?
Okay, well, I can't say. I I wouldn't want to be unfair to the author that you're citing, since I have never read that author. So, and I'm sure that you're doing a really great, back of the envelope job summarizing the argument. But with that said, it's hard for me to take on an argument that I would want to actually read more about before I take it on. Is this an argument based on? So here's my basic question. The reason that I say that rights are based on God-given rights is the idea that is long held in the Western canon, a combination of Judeo-Christian values and Aristotelian philosophy that suggests that individuals have certain rights as a facet of their reason, and that reason is originally provided by an unmoved mover. Right, so the idea, the reason that is important, as opposed to an atheistic philosophy of rights, is it's very difficult for me to see why an atheistic philosophy of rights. I don't know if this is an atheistic philosophy, is it?
It has no religious components. So
okay, so if you do it without reference to the inherent value of a human being, then certain people just fall by the wayside. I mean, even in the theory that you're espousing to me, which again I'm only getting sort of bare bones of it. You even in that, when you say, for example, will, if you don't have the capacity to exercise will, your rights go away. Okay, well, there are a lot of people like children who don't really have the capacity to exercise fully their will. Do they have any rights at all? I assume they have the right not to be killed. I assume they have the right not to be abused.
To my knowledge, they don't. America is one of the few developed countries with no children's rights.
That's not true. Children obviously have rights, which is why you have Child Protective Services that comes in and takes kids out of their parents' home if they're being abused. Kids don't have the rights to control, where they go to school. They don't have the right to control a lot of things about their life, but they certainly have basic human rights. I mean, I think the entire society is built around the idea of how do we assure basic human rights to children.
Okay, that essentially answers my question. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't quite follow everything, so I'm kind of trying to get up to speed with what's happening, but I wanted to thank my son. He's a senior in high school. He's the chairman of the YAF. He's sitting right over there. He is brilliant. He's the one that kind of turned me on to the podcast. I really enjoyed listening to sound speech, taking out some of the vulgarity, but...
we're in a college.
Yeah. So
nobody would understand me if I didn't drop a bullshit once in a while.
Okay. So my main question was going to be the role of the church and in the founding of our nation being so great. You being Jewish, I'm a Christian, I'm a devout follower of Jesus. I was able to get to the front of the line because I told him I was liberal because I'm a follower of Jesus. And he was one of the most liberal human beings, God in the flesh, human man that ever walked the face of the earth. He helped people, all of that good stuff. So, one other thing to caveat into this, how you reconcile the role of the church and in influencing culture.
Sure.
And also the fact that I did briefly grew up in California. It's known to be a more liberal state of our nation. I lived in Tampa, Florida for 3.5 years, worked for Hillsborough County, and I used the whites-only bathroom while I was there in 1995. It wasn't being used as such, but I don't know if it was the colors or the whites, but I asked the bailiff if I needed to use the restroom. I wasn't familiar with the courthouse. He said, well, we usually use the one, there's no sign on it, go in there. 1950s fixtures or 40s. Looked across the hall, there was a men's restroom. I said, this is interesting. I grew up in California, I'm living in the South. So I walked across the hallway, 1950s fixtures. So I think kind of balancing out the fact that there has been injustices in our country.
Yes.
You can't go back and change that, but you can tell those people that are living a victimized mentality that, look, yes, I understand because I don't know which was white or colored or whatever, but my wife grew up in Cuba.
I'm sorry.
Go on and on. Answers the question, but I really enjoyed it, but...
So a couple of things. As far as the role of the church in American society, your first question. My basic philosophy on this is that the government exists to preserve certain basic rights, and then you have social institutions that need to provide the safety net for the rest of society. So I'm very much for a strong church in regards to communal life. I mean, I belong to a synagogue. I believe that if you fall on hard times, then that means that the first thing that you need to do is go to your family, and then the second thing you need to do is go to your church. church, and then you go to your local community, and then up the scale. The problem that I see in society right now is that people go to the top of the scale, the federal government, they don't bother with anybody lower down on the scale, which is why you see this consistent growth in the federal government. Judeo-Christian values, as I have said 1,000 times, are the root of the civilization and cannot be ripped away without collapsing the civilization on top of it. As far as the idea of the existence of past racism in the United States, of course I agree that's true. I mean, I said that right in the speech. Obviously I agree that slavery and Jim Crow were some of the worst evils perpetrated by human beings. I mean, they're truly, truly evil. The question now is, we have people who are living now who have not committed those sins. Do we somehow do we punish them for the sins of their fathers, in other words? And is the best thing to do to teach an entire generation of young black people, for example, that America is inalterably racist, inalterably bigoted, and they're living in a country with such a brutal history of racism that they cannot rise, because that actually is false, backwards, and hurts them. That's my main philosophy. So you can understand when people say, listen, I mean, as a Jew, Jews have had a long history of oppression also, but that doesn't mean that I think that anybody owes me anything, and I don't think that it's appropriate to teach children that somebody owes you something as a general rule who have not done anything to you. I think that if somebody's done something to you, then they do owe you, but if they haven't done anything to you, then they don't owe you anything. And if you build a system based on you having to rectify mistakes that were made by your grandfather, we're never going to get beyond this. We're never going to get beyond this, because we all sinned against each other's grandfathers.
I agree. Thank you.
Hey Ben, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I disagree with you on a lot of things, but...
Well, thank you for coming anyway.
Yeah, of course. I think the one thing that I agree with you on is that free speech should be protected. But my question has to do with like political economy. I know you're a firm believer in that the government sucks at everything.
Pretty much, yeah.
You're also a firm believer that market-based competition is good. So I was wondering, what do you think about the role of like bureaucratic institutions or regulatory bodies to protect competition? For example, like the FCC. Sort of trust-busting like the internet providers from doing...
Yeah, so you're talking about antitrust laws? So yeah. I'm not a big believer in antitrust laws because I think the vast majority of things that the government declares monopolies are not in fact monopolies. The definition of monopoly is ownership of 100% of market share, which allows you to arbitrarily set prices and also to presumably buy out all of your competitors or use regulatory capture in order to prevent them from entering the market. I think the cases that are generally brought on antitrust grounds are very, very weak because there are usually large competitors even within the same industry. So to take an example, when they broke up Microsoft, Microsoft did not control 100% of the market. I don't even believe it controlled 75% of the market. It controlled something like 50% of the market, unless I'm getting this wrong. And they broke it up. Anyway, Apple overtook it in stock